Alberta Premier Danielle Smith is shaking up her team just as she prepares to potentially shake up the country. Today, the Premier shuffled her cabinet after two ministers asked to be relieved of their duties because they're not running again. And tonight, Smith will address her province, during which she could trigger a referendum on separation from Canada. A special committee just voted last hour to recommend a referendum question based on a pro-Confederation petition signed by more than 400,000 people. The question would be, do you agree that Alberta should remain in Canada? Well, today, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre was an enthusiastic yes on that, making clear where he stands on that debate.
So I'm a strong Canadian federalist, a proud Albertan, and a proud Canadian. I want a strong Alberta within a united Canada. It is the job of the Prime Minister of Canada to unite the country. And as Prime Minister in waiting, I will begin that work myself. I will be campaigning across the province of Alberta, encouraging Albertans to stay as part of the Canadian family and encouraging nationwide unity for all Canadians.
All right, we're going to start there with our Reporter Roundtable. We have Robert Fife, who is the Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Globe and Mail. Mia Rabson is the Deputy Parliamentary Bureau Chief at the Canadian Press, and Aaron Weary is a senior writer with CBC Politics. Good to see you all. Another slow week, Bob. Danielle Smith is about to be the first Federalist Premier in Canada to put a separatism question on a ballot and then campaign to stay, it would appear, is where this is going to go today. What do you make of the dynamic we're seeing here with the Premier of Alberta?
Madness.
Okay.
Total madness. Here you have a Premier who has been saying loudly since she was elected, and even before she was elected, that we need pipelines, we need natural gas pipelines, we need oil pipelines, we need to get our product to market, and we need foreign investors to come in here to Alberta to invest in them. What is she doing? She wants to hold a referendum so that foreign investors will say, you know what, I think I'll wait before I put any money in here because, you know, capital does not like disruption. They do not like uncertainty. And now she's created uncertainty. I mean, I'm sure the Prime Minister privately must be pulling out his hair out of his head, like, what is going on with this? You know, look, I have great faith in Albertans. They're patriotic people. They're not going to vote to separate from Canada. There's a group of about 20% who are MAGA separatists, I guess, independentists, and they're the ones that she's playing footsie with, which is crazy. I mean, she should be telling these people, go and form your own separatist party, run an election. If you get elected, you can put a referendum. But why is she aiding and abetting this? It's madness.
So, you know, Mia, for people who listen to this on the podcast on Friday, they're going to say, these people are really behind the times. But we're having this conversation about 2 hours before Danielle Smith speaks. And the court decision and the facts on the ground, the court decision throwing out the separatist referendum petition, it's put her in a spot now where Federalists accuse her of enabling separatism, and the separatists are saying, if you go with a softer question, we're going to take your job and take you out. This is almost like a no-win political situation.
I mean, she is in some ways between a rock and a hard place, but some of it is her own doing. I mean, they've not done a lot in the last year since some of these sentiments really started to bubble up to quell the movement, to quiet it, to work with other provinces, to work with the Prime Minister to sort of tamp all of this down. So they're coming into sort of fighting it a little bit late. She sort of seemed to be sitting back and just hoping it would play out, and now realizing, well, you know, everything's getting real now. I have to deal with this. It does seem with the move she's making with this pro-Canada question or pro-staying in Canada question to try and, okay, let's try and put this to bed. You know what? We're going to have a referendum. We need to quiet these people. Let's just let's deal with this once and for all. It's a move, but it does seem a little bit maybe delayed in terms of her reaction. The noise and, you know, the one to Bob's point, like the one thing she wants is a pipeline. Last week, she got the federal government to agree, okay, we'll support a pipeline. They want most of those approvals in place by September. And now she's going to ask in October whether we should stay in Canada. It seems a little bit bizarre. Building a pipeline to the BC coast is going to be hard enough if you are in Canada. So.
Yes, when you have national borders on all four sides, it becomes infinitely more complicated. But, you know, Aaron, in terms of, you know, Bob calls it madness, but the enabling conditions here, like lowering the threshold to get a question on a referendum ballot, changing the law so that if it's a constitutional referendum, it is binding on the government, was the way of letting the separatist cohort, which makes up a big part of her party, have their moment. but then the courts intervened, and now she is absolutely stuck because she can't give them the legally binding question they want.
Yeah, I think it'll be very interesting to see what the wording is that she suggests tonight, if that's in fact what we're going to get, and for a couple of things. One, what the court, whether it triggers some kind of legal challenge, whether it triggers some kind of political challenge to her job, and then third, I think, does Parliament, have to consider this in the context of the Clarity Act? Is it a clear, is the question a clear declaration of secession or the possibility of secession, and then therefore does Parliament have to pass judgment on it? To Bob's point, it is remarkable that a premier who is not a separatist, does not lead a separatist party, did not campaign on separatism, is about to launch a referendum that could trigger it ultimately. Yes, there's surely a political argument that maybe this is some kind of pressure release valve. Mm-hmm. I think the problem with that is that, again, you're still taking a massive risk. Once you put this on the table, once you trigger a campaign, it's sort of out of your hands at that point. And you can campaign for it. You can make the argument for staying in Canada, but referendums are unpredictable, and they're not necessarily the end of the conversation, right? We saw that in Quebec, where it lost in a referendum in 1980, and then there was a referendum in 1995, and it lost again, and we are still talking about the possibility of another future third referendum in Quebec. And so I think the gravity of this situation really needs to be underscored, and however we got to this point, I would hope everyone involved is taking it quite seriously.
Bob, I wonder, we get to this referendum question spelled out by the Premier tonight, and, it'll happen on October 19th, but it will not be constitutionally binding, right? But if there's a big number for the do you want to leave Canada part of that vote, it creates a whole new political fact on the ground, and then the next referendum, and you know what I mean? It goes about everything, right. And it cements this as a permanent feature, potentially, of Alberta's political culture.
Well, first of all, I think in parliamentary democracies, referendums are a bad idea. We elect members of Parliament. We don't like what they stand for. We throw them out. So if you want to be a separatist party, run in an election. Make it a platform. If you get accepted, then you put a referendum to the voters. In this particular case, also the other thing, as we saw in Great Britain with Brexit, referendums are dangerous. Mm-hmm. Look, in Britain, they would have that Brexit referendum would have lost, but a lot of young people in London just didn't bother to vote.
Yep. And
if they had voted, they would have won. And now they've really screwed themselves over in Great Britain because of Brexit. Now they're trying to sneak back in to the European Union because of Donald Trump's tariff wars. But again, I have to keep repeating this because it's so important. You can't at one moment talk about wanting capital in to build multi-billion-dollar pipelines, at the same time introduce such insecurity and uncertainty into the equation here. It makes just no sense. I mean, people who are sitting on stacks of money are not going to want to invest if they know that the province could separate from Canada. Why would they do that?
So, Mia, is this a dynamic that the Premier is driving or being driven by?
Probably a combination of both. Yeah. I mean, like I said earlier, she could have dealt with this a year ago. She could have been stronger. She could have said, no, we're not doing this referendum. To Bob's point, you want to do this, get yourself elected. She sort of has enabled the process, and now she is having to live with the process that she enabled. So now, in terms of what she's doing today, I mean, maybe that part is being, her hand is being forced because of the events with the other particular question. But she opened the door to this herself, and now she's living with those consequences. There's no doubt about that.
Right, but so Aaron, this argument that you should say, run as a separatist, do this, that they have not had success running as separatist parties, but this is the Jason Kenney position, and we all saw what the United Conservative Party did to Jason Kenney, right? And she seems pretty keen on avoiding the same fate.
Yeah, and so maybe this helps her stay in office. I think the flip side to that question is it a net good for, to Bob's point, Alberta, and is it a net good for the country? And I think that's a bit harder to answer in the affirmative, because, you know, yes, the polls right now say it's only 25%. I believe the polls in '95 also said it wasn't going to be much of a contest, and then it was. So I think, you know, I wouldn't take for granted necessarily that the result is going to be what you think it's going to be. But once you've established, to your point, once you've established, like, let's say it comes in at 25% or 30%, where does that lead exactly? Is that the end of the story? Yeah. Does that give some momentum to a separatist party in Alberta? Like, what's the day after the referendum look like? Where does the conversation go after that? And, you know, not to skip ahead, but I think the campaign has a real possibility to be very divisive and very difficult. And I think it's going to require some, you know, very talented and smart responses from Federalist politicians. I think it was very interesting to hear Pierre Poilievre come out very categorically and say, I will be campaigning for a united Canada. You know, not just to say that he believes in that position, but that he's going to go around the province and make that argument. I would hope that the federal government has had lots of conversations about exactly how they're going to approach this. They can at least look at the experiences of '95 and 1980. But I think the example of those two campaigns and the lesson of those two campaigns is that these are hard moments for the country and for the people involved and for the people voting. And I don't see why that wouldn't be the case here.
It is an interesting one to see, Bob, how Pierre Poilievre is going to do this without undermining Danielle Smith, because she is holding up the MOU and the implementation agreement of the MOU as a proof point that federalism can work. And the federal Conservatives are just refusing to concede any progress on that point, saying that this is really a meaningless agreement, right? So if she's waving this around as an example of success, how does Pierre Poilievre calibrate his fight for Canada
there's
without
two
criticizing?
issues. There's the issue of the MOU and the politics of that. And of course, he doesn't have a lot of choice here. He can't be saying that Mark Carney's done a good thing by cutting a deal with Danielle Smith on having a pipeline, which I expect
but
will happen.
undermining, impeaching her Exhibit A is going to be tough between now and October 19th.
Yeah. Look, I mean, what she's decided, she gambled a little, took a page out of what the Bloc Quebec, or the Parti Québécois has done, which is René Lévesque hold a knife to the throat of Canada, and that's what she's trying to do. And it's gotten away from her now, and now the separatists in the party, the MAGA people in the UPC party, have a knife to her throat, and she's the one that's, you know, trying to hold back these people. But it's all at the expense of not only national unity, but at a time when we are in a very serious economic trade war with the United States, and where we have to diversify and where we have to try to get our oil and gas in particular to global markets so we can get world price and bring in significant amounts of money that will can be used for social welfare, social programs, and a whole lot of other issues, including more infrastructure investment. She's playing with fire, and it simply doesn't make any sense. And you've sat down, you've tried to talk to her about it, and it doesn't make any sense when you try to prod her and try to. Why are you doing this? She doesn't really have an explanation for it.
You know, Mia, you know, the 1995 and 1980 referendums. As Bob just outlined, so many things are different now, right? The change in the U.S. in '95, it was the beginning of, you know, deeper integration at a really accelerated level. But the politics of the country is not nearly as unified as it was back then, at least at the Federalist level. The media ecosystem has been obliterated since then, and the algorithms are powerful, and they are not operating in the best interest of democracy and strong nation states other than the United States.
I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, I think we've seen foreign interference and what it has already attempted to do. I think that there is no doubt that we will see some people who don't really have a vested interest in an outcome one way or the other. They just want to cause trouble. And any time we're talking about a country potentially splitting up, that's not good for Canada. It's not good for the economy. It's not good for, obviously, for national unity. I do think the country was a little bit more united even a year ago. I mean, we saw the premiers moving together that Team Canada approach in a way I think we even talked about on this panel at the time that we hadn't seen in a very long time. But that also seems to have sort of dissipated a little bit in the months since.
The slumber parties have stopped him. Yeah.
Well, yes, the slumber party, at least for today.
Yeah.
But so there was some sense of Team Canada and this idea that, okay, we have to fight this, this Goliath below us. But Danielle Smith has sort of, she lit the match on this and sort of trying to put that genie back in the bottle. She doesn't, one of the possible creative ways, and I don't think this is going to happen, but she could have just an actual election. She could say, let's not have a referendum, let's make the election the referendum. And then you're not actually voting on a question, you are campaigning for the reason, and then you might be able to quiet it. It's a possibility.
Look what happened with Brian Mulroney when he invited separatists into the Progressive Conservative Party. Mm-hmm. They blew up the party. Mm-hmm. And they destroyed his prime ministership. And she's doing the same thing with these people. At some point, leaders have to be leaders. Get out of the party. Get out of our party, because we're a Federalist party. We're not a separatist party. Go and form your own party.
Aaron, I wonder if David Cameron ever looks at Canadian news and says, did you learn nothing? Because Brexit got away from him. And it was a similar sort of thing, right? The people who are now with Nigel Farage. He was trying to appease a lot of those voters, a lot of that cohort, and you ride the tiger and you lose it. And right now it seems like Canada is vulnerable, at least the electorate is vulnerable to influences that are not necessarily good faith actors.
Yeah, I think I would have thought that anyone out in the post-Brexit era, people would have been very loath to call referendums that they didn't want to see result in a choice. So to that respect, it is, look, the Brexit example hangs over this like a ghost. To your point on interference and influence, I do think, to go back to 95 again, in that case, the Clinton administration in Washington was entirely on the side of a united Canada. Yeah. Bill Clinton made comments to express his support for a united Canada. James Blanchard, the American ambassador in Washington, was entirely trying to support the Federalist side in that referendum without necessarily interfering. And in this case, it's hard to know what to expect from the Trump administration. I think everyone will have their fears that they will try to interfere or at least stir up trouble. Even if it's not some kind of official interference, we've already had concerns raised about foreign actors, using social media to try to influence this discussion.
Or Scott Bessent,
right.
In an interview with Jack Posobiec, who's a Pizzagate conspiracy theorist, suggesting, oh, look, Alberta wants to do stuff with us, right? They know what they're doing there. That is a deliberate destabilization move.
Now, granted, the Americans getting involved may be one thing that absolutely, completely undercuts the separatist cause, given the mood in this country.
Yeah.
But the foreign interference angle, look, we Bob would know this very well. We just had a real long discussion in this country for a couple of years about the possibility of foreign interference and whether our institutions were capable of repelling it. And I am interested to see what the safeguards are that are in place at this point. If foreign interference is detected, our agency is going to be able to flag that and report it publicly. Is Elections Alberta set up to deal with those kind of threats? Because that is the media world we live in. Not that not that in '95 Canadians weren't able to, see foreign media, but it's just a different world now. And I don't know whether our institutions are set up for a vote like this to deal with something like that.
Well, yeah,
that's a really good point. Because we're members of Five Eyes and we rely heavily on American intelligence, there's a vast array of intelligence services. I think CSIS is going to be very loath to come out and publicly say there are Americans who are involved in trying to separate Canada. Because they would say it if it's China or India, but they're very unlikely. I think they would say it because of the United States, because if they cut off
Right.
our intelligence sharing, or they cut off some of the defense stuff, would be serious repercussions for the country.
But Mia, there's a sort of like electoral meddling and influence that doesn't have to be state-driven or politically motivated, just the AI slop. There's videos of me talking about $1,000 a week or $1,000 from the government that is not real. But if just people decide to use the platforms like we've seen with YouTubers from the Netherlands, I don't know if our institutions can react quickly enough to it in the run-up to a vote with AI and all of that.
It's very hard to get ahead of that, and there's also a lot of money involved. I mean, we saw that happening during the Freedom Convoy in 2022, when there was money coming in to support that from foreign places, not foreign governments, just individuals around the world who either supported the cause or just wanted to create havoc. So the financing could potentially come from there, and we've all seen the algorithms. We've all sort of been inundated with the stuff online. It's a powerful drug that is very hard to combat.
I wouldn't rule out Donald Trump supporting them. I mean, there's no low for that guy.
I mean, Donald Trump himself has talked about Canada separating or becoming the 51st state. So,
And when you have the Treasury Secretary, as you pointed out, making similar wink-wink noises, we should be very, very concerned about American MAGA influence in this referendum.
And it would be to their best interest, probably, that this would not destabilize Canada.
They weaken
for their
Canada and helps them in the negotiations.
Yeah, and the algorithms, they were in the front row of the inauguration. So there's an alignment of goals and interests there. We're out of time. We've got to leave it there. Not our last conversation about Alberta. I think on this panel, I want to say thank you, Robert Fife, Mia Rabson, and Aaron Wary.